Can everybody give me a clapstick? Sean?
I guess we'll see.
You're not looking at me, and therefore you don't see that I'm holding up my hands to do a clapstick. 3, 2, 1. So you guys seemed way off to me.
I think that's just a Zoom issue. Like, I don't know what else we can do. We could spend a lot of time clapping and then use that as an applause track.
That'd be nice.
It would be fitting for, misplaced audience canned laughter for this episode.
Holy shit, that was fucking crazy. I didn't think I was actually hearing it at first. I was like, what is that?
Yeah.
And I had to go back and watch it again because it comes in such weird. I guess we should wait until we get into this, but
well, theoretically, we could just say we're in it. This is the podcast. What are we warming up for?
I don't want to strain a podcast muscle though.
That's true. You gotta warm up, get into it.
Mm-hmm. Hey everybody, welcome to Co-Pilots. I am Sean Conroy.
And I'm Andy Secunda.
On this podcast, we talk about TV pilots, the first episodes of television shows. Sometimes pilots become long-running series. Others don't make it past that first episode.
We're going to talk about all of them. The great pilots, the bad pilots, the weird pilots, the forgotten pilots. We are TV writers, but it should be noted that we are the dumbest TV writers you know, so all of these are just our dumb opinions.
So dumb.
Andy, do you want to introduce our guest?
Our guest is a very, very dear friend of mine and a person I worked with for some time at the television ABC sitcom The Goldbergs, and has many other impressive credits, amongst them Community. And Steve, feel free to toot your own horn or tell us your journey in whatever form you feel comfortable and you feel like doesn't reveal too much about your past for people to gather information to try to destroy you.
I think I've done enough damage on my own.
We've been in many writers' rooms together, B rooms together, coming up with alts. He's one of the funniest people I know. He's one of the most talented people I know. And he's also a very dear friend, Steve Basilone.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. What a dream.
Is it a dream?
I don't know. It's something to do with a Friday
Fairly
afternoon.
certain you listened to the first episode you listened to yesterday, but
That's not true. I listened to my second episode yesterday.
oh, okay.
So there you go. And this is, this meant I didn't have to do work for 3 hours today or pretend to do work. So I read a bunch of articles on Sports Night. I watched the pilot twice. I did my homework.
It's a show that I've heard a great deal about, watched it a little bit back in the day in its inception, circled back to it, and I'm guessing, and I'm curious to hear, that I'm going to be in the minority of that every time I've watched it, and this viewing of the pilot was no different, it has unsettled me and I have not been on board and I didn't watch really much further. And I know that almost universally it is beloved and well thought of as a smart, innovative show. People love it. I don't hold up my opinion as the empirically correct one, but I'm curious what both of your experiences were coming to the show.
Steve?
Well, I brought it up because it's a thing that I kind of discovered happenstance because it came out in 98. And in 98, I was in my senior year of high school. So I was doing, cool things like bird dog and chicks, not watching television, ABC sitcoms. I was doing musical theater and trying to get into college and hanging out in coffee shops like people were on sitcoms. So I wasn't really watching it. So I just came to it like a year later, I think, when I was back from college and it was already syndicated at Comedy Central. And I was like, this is a fascinating little show. Because at that point in time, it feels like it's a facsimile of itself now. It's a caricature of itself. But at the time, it was like the first time you'd really seen like any of the Sorkinisms. Because they weren't really on display in A Few Good Men.
Right. It was pre-West Wing, yeah.
Yeah, and they were kind of a little bit on display in American President, but not to the same, like the rat-a-tat, like the kind of jazziness of it. And I just thought it was so interesting, especially for like a sitcom. Even in this pilot, it's a weird juxtaposition of like fucking Benny Hill, pratfalls.
Scene,
yeah, and then up against it, just like two guys having an argument for 3.5 minutes, not moving, sitting at a desk. It's just like a weird juxtaposition and a weird tone that wasn't on network television, like at all. Like dramas were dramas and comedies were comedies up until this point. Like it was before like Sopranos. It was before like HBO really kind of came into its heyday. Like Dream On and shit was there, but even those were pretty much just comedies. So I was just like, this is a fascinating show. And I kind of got enamored with like the lyricism of it. You see it not as much here, but like there's another episode, even the second episode, Robert Goulmet, I always fuck up his, how do we say
Guillaume.
Gwilliam.
Guillaume.
Wow, we're crushing it, guys. We're just going to call him.
I
We're
know
gonna call
that
him
it's
Benson.
Guillaume. His name is Robert Guillaume.
90% of this show is about pronunciations.
Okay, great. One more time, Andy?
Robert Guillaume.
Yeah, so in the second one, and Benson gives this speech that's amazing. That's just him talking about like his alma mater and why it's inappropriate for them to have Confederate flags at football games. And it was this very like heartfelt, like network rah-rah speech that I just didn't see as much. I mean, you saw like that you saw in A Few Good Men, but you didn't see like that mixed with all of like just smarm jokes. They're not really jokes. There's very few jokes. And the ones that are jokes, they don't land because they're kind of given to like Felicity Huffman. I think she's great at the dramatic moments in this, but anytime she's given a joke, it is not so hot.
Well, that's why the audience was so hesitant to laugh throughout most of the show. The jokes weren't really landing, so the audience kind of laid back a little bit.
Yeah.
Was it an audience? I was under the impression that there were just sort of ghosts that were floating through the studio, that just like laughter from a bygone show that no longer is.
It felt a little bit like they recorded it on a previously used VHS tape, and there was still some of the sound left over. Yeah,
it was so bizarre, but I do think it's great that like they have a couple of canned laughs in this scene where they're actively being like, "Fuck you, suit, you network stooge." Like his disdain, even in a pilot, the first time he's ever done television is so on his sleeve. His disdain for anybody who has any sort of say over him or has tried to
network executive,
inject any level of authority. He's like, "Fuck you."
I mean, we're jumping ahead, but just to get into that, do you think, because it struck me, do you think he was using his experience in the movie business and then saying, oh, this is where I can really stick it to the movie suits? Or do you think that it was so immediately clear to him what the note-giving process was going to be that he, coming from theater, was just like, oh, I got to write this guy in? It's sort of integral to the plot, so it probably was there.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is like that was basically the gist of the whole pilot, so it seems like he probably couldn't correct course midstream. He probably came in with that idea of this is what it's going to be. It's going to be the war between the talent and the machine.
I think that was part of it, but I think like some of the ire that is there, it is an interesting pilot story because it's essentially a man going through a divorce who's in a slump. But they also bring in a new character, which for any other pilot would be the pilot story. That's just like kind of ancillary. That's just like we're bringing him in for our Lucille Ball comedic moments. But everything else is just kind of like heavy in this guy who's kind of down in the dumps. But I do think like his ire for the suit, for JJ, is definitely, that was colored by his experience by the time it made to air, I think.
So you're saying that probably that moment where he attacks the suit, where he is presented as being erratic and going too far, but that it was just like maybe that just got scaled up and up and up as Sorkin experienced more.
Yeah, I feel like
of the process.
Like the third notes pass, the final line is like, "I'll put my foot on your throat," is probably, I don't think that was the first draft. Third draft is like, "Yeah, I'm gonna put my foot on your throat, bro."
It's sort of an interesting way of handling notes, that every time the script comes back, there's a more and more hostility toward the network executive character.
Yeah, it's a great failsafe.
Just to clarify this, Steve, so you thought it was interesting. You clearly had some critiques, but were you one of those people that are like, Sports Night was the best, like in the end?
I really loved it. They didn't know what to do with Josh Malina. Clearly, he loved him because he was in, I think one of his first roles were A Few Good Men, and he was also in American President. So he like wanted him around. And it makes sense to me now. That's probably the only reason he wasn't in West Wing, because they overlapped. So he wasn't able to put him in West Wing until after what's his name dropped out.
Rob Lowe.
But yeah, I feel like it's a little bit tonally inconsistent in the pilot, but I ended up loving the series. I mean, there's still like, I think I probably watched it 3 times because it was, it was 40 episodes, and it was like right before bed, watch an episode before there was late night syndication or any sort of streaming. I would just pop in a DVD that I got at Amoeba when I first moved out here. And that would be kind of like a great before bed palate cleanser. Again, even then, I felt like when I moved out here in 2003, even then on television, we were seeing a little bit of that. And there was like a lot of, darker comedy. Sopranos was going strong, but it was still like that kind of tenor was not as commonplace. And I had yet to watch The West Wing, so I was really still not familiar with that rhythm. So I liked it, and I also liked other guest stars. Like I liked bringing up William H. Macy. They had Clark Gregg in the second season, who invariably was the guy who bought the network at the end of the series.
Spoilers, Steve.
I know. Well, you've had 20 years to adjust. 24.
I never buy that argument.
Yeah,
but it's fine with me here.
But it was, anyways. Yeah, I always enjoyed it. I mean, I don't know if I'd enjoy it as much now because it's. I don't know. Like I remember when I first. This is going to be controversial, but I remember like I came to Pavement late, the band.
How dare you?
Yeah, I know. But they were like a little bit before I was cool enough to listen to. So by the time I listened, I was like, this is great, but it also reminds me of a bunch of other bands who just stole from them that I came up with. So I had more of, fondness for that. And I was like, yeah, this is fine, but this was not... It's like I watched... it was also very stupid, makes me look bad, but I saw Mank before I saw Citizen Kane. And I was like, I like Mank better. Which is very stupid. I know that.
That's just a hilarious comparison, though. That is fantastic. Did Citizen Kane have Gary Oldman? I don't think so.
There's no Amanda Seyfried anywhere in Citizen Kane.
Now, let me ask you guys this. Were either of you Sports Center fans during that time?
My cleanest tip-off to me that's just like, I don't think I'm on board with this show is I wasn't in particular like a rabid ESPN watcher, but I was a rabid Knicks fan at that time. And there's a huge Knicks run in the middle of this episode that goes on for a 22-minute show, a very long time. And I was still like, that to me is the most cloying moment in the whole show. So, yeah. How about you, Sean? What was your overall take on the show, Sean?
Well, I watched it a little bit when it first came out. I had not watched any other Sorkin stuff at that point and would not watch West Wing until, 2014, 2015.
On policy.
At a protest.
You would not watch it.
I would not. Absolutely not.
People should not be walking while they are also talking on television. It's distracting.
Finally, Alan Alda's around and he's a conservative. I'll give it a go.
But I found this show very, in a way that I don't find West Wing to be, I found this show labored. Like I felt like, at the time it came out, I was like, this is it's too much. It was too much for me. The way that, kind of exactly what you're talking about, Steve, the jazzy feel and the back and forth and the repetition, and I just found it overwhelming at that time. It was not a thing that so I watched 3 or 4 episodes and then I stopped watching.
And that was the same as me. Now, Steve, as you were the one who was the true fan at the time, at least, do you feel like the tonal aspects that we're talking about and we're going to get into more, do you feel like that they evolved over time and that people kind of found the obviously let me go to an overview first and then we circle back to that question. Just as an overview, Steve has mentioned a lot of it. It was written by Aaron Sorkin. He came out with A Few Good Men, this incredibly successful play in about 88. It was made as a movie with Tom Cruise, Demi Moore, Jack Nicholson,
Kevin Pollak. Don't forget Kevin Pollak.
Cuba Gooding Jr.
Not a single Kevin Pollak impression in that movie. I don't know what I'm paying for.
Kevin Bacon.
Tom Cruise did the
right.
impression.
Cuba Gooding was in it. Oh, that's right. He does. Wow. I wonder if I never thought about that, but Kevin Pollak must have been like
so mad.
I mean, he's fine. I really should be.
My wheelhouse.
I'm sure he was so thrilled to be in that part.
Maybe I could do a Shatner in the next scene.
Doesn't really fit, Kevin. Anyway, then he wanted to do The American President, which sort of, in many ways a precursor of West Wing. And I assumed that all of these things gave him the positioning for TV to come a calling and be like, all right, you want your own thing. He was trying to write The American President at the time, and he sort of was watching ESPN all the time, and that gave him the inspiration to write an ESPN sort of inspired movie. He couldn't never figure out the structure, and I would love to know more details, because to me it is the single thing that makes it not work for me. And from what I'm inferring from what you said, Sean, for you, is if this had been an hour long, then I think it would have bumped me less, because it's a half hour and it is structured like a half hour. And the laugh track is obviously the biggest problem. But I think even in the tone, it's like they're in this struggle with themselves between being a sitcom of the time, not obviously even a modern day single camera sitcom, like a studio multicam sitcom, and an hour long. And while it is without question innovative, it is, to me, the thing that I can't get over. And Sorkin apparently didn't want to use a live audience. So I don't understand, if he didn't want to use the live audience, did he want to do a half hour? Or did they cram it into it? Or he thought, oh, this is going to be so funny, it's got to be a half hour? Because he wasn't necessarily on board with the laugh track. So it's like, well, if you're going to do it live, then it has to have a laugh track, I think, in the eyes of the network. And then it was slowly, he won this battle where it was sort of dialed down over season one, and then eventually ABC relented and allowed him to
Season two was just one person going, huh.
Yeah.
Well, there would just be one person just nodding, going, when they understood the joke, like every fucking New York play.
Good dialogue. Mm-hmm. But ABC in season two finally allowed him to not shoot it with a live audience, which made it much easier to shoot, obviously. I don't know if by that token they're the ones who invented a hybrid sitcom, which later became commonplace.
Well, you keep on saying, I was under the impression, I don't think anything was a live audience. There was always single cam. I mean, like, it opens up with like a 30-second oneer. And I thought that was what was compelling when I first saw it, because it just felt so much more cinematic than anything I'd been seeing on TV. And I think everything you guys are feeling, like, Sorkin felt as well. I think he didn't know how to run a show yet. He didn't know what to do with it. Comedy was, as much as he thinks he's funny, he's not that kind of funny. And I read today, which I didn't know, that they had the opportunity. HBO, Showtime, and USA all wanted to pick it up after ABC canceled it, and he said no to all of them because he wanted to focus on The West Wing. Because I think he's like, this is more well suited for me. I don't have to do jokes. I can do just like chuckles and smiles, and that's enough. I can be self-serious because the stakes are much higher. Because that's also another big problem with it, is like, at the end of the day, there's a self-seriousness that he brings to everything. But it's harder to care when you're talking about cricket or you're talking about baseball scores or whatever. Like, the Into Zelky Nelson is great because it ties in this kind of social commentary in that story, and it ties into like why people love the Olympics, because it's all like those backstories. But I think, like, in general, week to week, it's hard to bring his level of puffed up peacock kind of importance to just sports.
Just to follow up on that, I really felt that, particularly in that opening montage of like, this is fucking important shit we're doing here. And it's like, well, not necessarily. I think that's obviously a thing that TV is obsessed with, like TV and how important TV is. There's just been so many, like, I always think of cops and firemen as the big thing on TV and hospitals, but there's so many shows that people have made about TV shows and being on TV and whatever. And that whole opening sequence felt so self-important to me. And just coincidentally, I've been rewatching The West Wing lately, and I was trying to think about the big difference between the shows in terms of what's going on. And it feels like in West Wing, it's all about these people who are doing everything they can for other people. And just watching this pilot, it's them talking about what's going on with other people. I don't know, this is why sports are bad, because people murder people and get in fights and, all that kind of stuff.
Well, that's what's so, there's so many things. And I wonder if by the end of this, we're just going to enrage the sports
Aaron
night
Sorkin's
fans.
going to bomb our houses.
Aaron Sorkin, you can feel free to punch me in the face. But is just yes, it's so self-important. And I think, Sean, even beyond the fact that people are helping other people, unless you mean as a whole that they're in government and they're helping other people, to me, that's the larger thing it's global politics. It's it
is important. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's legitimately important. And even if you go back to A Few Good Men, or American President for that matter, which was a little bit lighter, but definitely A Few Good Men, it's the lives of these two Marines hang in the balance.
Right.
So it's those, yes, they're self-important and there are a lot of self-important speeches, and it's very Sorkin-y, but it's at least justified. And I think he's this is my skill, so I'm going to this. And my guess is, from having seen also Studio 60, another outing of Sorkin, I think that for him, great drama, which you could argue he's right, is when the characters are this is the most important thing to me. And it's that's true, except sometimes it's hard to convince the audience that it's the most important thing.
Well, I wonder if we're going to be seeing a little bit of that in the new Saturday Night movie, where it's just I'm sure it's going to be fascinating. I'm very excited to see it, but it's also, every trailer thus far has had that Studio 60 sheen of this is so fucking important and so revolutionary, but there's zero jokes. But that's another time. But
It's also that's Jason Reitman. And what would we point to? Up in the Air is probably his most successful outing, right?
Yeah, I think Juno was the most, won an Oscar at least.
Ghostbusters?
Yeah. Labor Day, remember that scene where they made that pie that was real weird?
Whatever the case, it seems like he might be a little bit more lyrical and willing to have his characters sort of be funny without being kind of smug about it.
Yes.
Whereas it feels like it's part of the Sorkin thing that his characters are a little smug, and that's the thing that's kind of gets under my skin a little bit about Sports Night. And also, I would also be curious, Steve, to your point about Sorkin thinking, oh, this is more my gear with West Wing. That definitely checks out to me. Him going, this is more my gear because I'm not going to be able to write jokes, based on the fact that he went to Studio 60 later and wrote the Sorkin character as a guy who's writing an hour and a half of sketch comedy every week by himself. I don't know if I buy that, but I would certainly agree that the jokes here are not there.
I do think it was easier in terms of just injecting the most important stakes with the West Wing, because every week you can do, what was it, season 3, Elizabeth Moss is kidnapped, and that could be any show, but on top of that, there's still arms races and things that can come in week to week. There's the stakes are very high. The stakes were the show's not doing well and you went through a divorce. I think those are all can be compelling, but the kind of that everybody has to be the smartest in the room. Everybody has these just really long, hyper articulate monologues going through it, and I think it's fascinating to watch. Does it always work? No. But I lost my train of thought entirely. But I do think part of the reason why he also jumped ship was...
You are not a Sorkin character, my friend.
No, he would never say that. That was a rewrite. No, but I think it's also hubris. I think it's because, okay, I wrote this thing. If this was a juggernaut, I would stay. But he didn't want it to go on because he already had season 1 of something else that was already crushing and that he had full control of before it was taken away from him. And I think that's where you get to Studio 60. That's hubris again. Well, I did this thing previously, and now I'm just going to kind of try to recreate that on a different... Now I know better.
I understand comedy even more than I did before.
Right.
Well, he was definitely rewarded quite a bit, and with with due cause was valid. He's a great writer.
Oh, without question, he's a great writer, and that is never my argument. I find when he's operating on all cylinders, it's like watching fireworks. It's just so entertaining. He's a great dramatist. And it is funny that then he went back to newsroom after studios. It's like, all right, I just got to fucking stay in my lane. To great success again. But one thing that's just sort of a side note, us working in television and having been in the position in different forms of like, oh, is the next season going to get picked up? Am I going to have work? Can you imagine having been on Sports Night and then maybe hearing in the pipeline, like, people want to pick it up. We're all going back to work, whether you're crew or cast or writers. And him going, no, thank you.
Yeah, not ideal. But, you know,
been
almost everybody on that show, with the exception of Sabrina Lloyd, who just kind of petered off slowly after that.
Was that Natalie? Is that the producer?
Yeah,
Wasn't she? It was after that she was in Sliders, though.
Before that.
Oh, it was before that.
Yeah.
Oh, too bad.
So she did like 48 episodes of Sliders, then did this. And then the last time she did anything was in 2013, which was, I had two separate experiences in the early aughts with people from Sports Night. I used to write for, bougie socialite magazines when I was young because I could just, it paid shit, but I could go to parties and live off of past apps. So I went to one party and I saw it was Josh Charles hanging out with Peter Dinklage, and the station agent had just come out, and like that was his breakthrough, and Peter Dinklage was huge for that moment, and everybody kept on coming up to Peter Dinklage, and I just happened to be standing by the bar, and I turned to the two of them. They were talking, and I was like, excuse me, and Josh Charles kind of shrank, and Peter Dinklage was like, yes, and I was like, I just want you to know, I fucking love Sports Night. And Josh Charles was like so excited because it was a moment where he was, I don't think, working as much. And I did the same thing for Sabrina Lloyd at the ArcLight once. She was dating somebody who was on ER when ER was still a big old deal. And he was butthurt I wasn't talking to him.
Clooney. Was it Clooney?
It was Eric LaSalle. I just kept on doing that move.
Were they excited? Did they stay and talk to you all night?
No, I talked to Josh Charles for a minute, but no, not all night. I think actually that was a party for The Apprentice, so it's a weird time in history.
So, Sean, now would you like to lead us proper through
I just want to say one more thing about what we're talking about. Like, I feel like the stuff about it being high stakes or not high stakes is the crux of everything. Like, I guess that is one of the things that hugely rubbed me the wrong way, was like, oh, we're so important. We're a highlights show. But I feel like they made an effort, Sorkin made an effort, because it's really all about this divorce, and am I going to quit the show, and how can I impress my son? And that does feel like a high-stakes thing, but it's so sidelined, not to use a sports metaphor, but it's so sidelined throughout the episode and only becomes a big deal at the very end that it doesn't feel like it's really resonating with the character the whole time.
But also the question is, and this is where to me the inherent problem with what the show is set up to be, of a comedy show, a comedy half hour in a multicam vibed slot. And look, I don't know, maybe they didn't have an audience. In the things that I read, it said it did have a live audience, and then they sweetened it with a laugh track, and that was what a lot of critics and probably, viewers.
That was the article you read in Live Audience Monthly, right?
That's right. It's just written by people coming out of audiences, and they all gather together.
And they say, we were there.
This is what the warm-up comic was like. But it's just like, he's clearly going after drama. Maybe he's not. Maybe he thinks it's hilarious. But it's hard to imagine, even the way these things are structured, that he thinks, oh, this is going to be a laugh line and this is going to be a laugh line. It feels like it's more like he put it on its feet. It's got these dramatic, mostly theater actors. It's written like a dramatic theater piece. The audience isn't laughing. And then he's like, oh, I guess the things that might have gotten a few laughs if this was like a full-length play, because that's the vibe they're in, are not getting laughs now because people are like leaning forward for where are the jokes. And there are, I would argue, no jokes.
I think you're wrong, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
We'll get to all the good stuff.
Well, they're AI jokes. AI level jokes. So, to me, it's just, they're screwed right out of the gate. It's actually impressive that they went 2 seasons. I guess people, It's like you're saying, Steve, you used to watch it every night, that it was this comforting thing. And I guess after you're in that slot and you're just like, I don't care. I'm not looking for big laughs. I'm not looking for what I get in other shows, in other sitcoms. Then you sort of just relax into it and you're like, this is kind of comforting. You got that rat-a-tat Sorkin thing that at that point I can't get anywhere else. It's character sort of building and how they interact. And that's what I'm following. Is that accurate?
I think so. Well, I would ask, I have two questions. I think two things would be the dividing line. One, how big of into sports are either of you? Because I know you're a Knicks fan, but like to day, how much of a sports fan?
Well, I was thinking about that because there's this whole thing of like the characters are based on Dan Patrick and Keith Olbermann, and some of the stuff for Casey is based on Craig Kilborn. And I did watch SportsCenter. I mean, I'm a huge sports fan and was into all that stuff and watched SportsCenter a little bit, but unfortunately, my favorite SportsCenter, it wasn't even SportsCenter, I forget what it was called, but it was after they started ESPN2. And on Saturday mornings, they would show a 15-minute version of SportsCenter hosted by Kenny Mayne, which I loved because I thought Kenny Mayne was great. I would frequently watch it like 3 or 4 times in a row just to see the jokes he had. So I do like the idea of that world. That's my response to that question. I don't love running, though. That's one of the problems.
I don't love running, but I will say, like, I think it is like a cheat in the same way, like, it's fathers and sons at the end, and it's also, I found myself in the last couple of years, like, getting very invested in the Lakers, a team that I previously did not give a shit about and actively did not like, especially in, like, their heyday of, the late 90s, early aughts into the early teens. But then LeBron came here and was like, he's almost my age. And I am just like, that's a thing I'm clinging to. Like, look at this old motherfucker still doing it. And I think that's part of it. But I think there is, like, I brought up the Olympics earlier. When you see that kind of, like, backstory, like, that is just such a cheat for me in terms of, like, getting emotional that's maybe not earned. And it was the same thing at the end of this. At the end of this, just, like, I don't think that's earned at all. Like, him being ready to quit, to having this one moment of reminding him when he liked it, it was not enough. Like, he was at a 10, and it was just flipped all away just because of this one race. That's not earned. But it still worked for me because I got emotional in that moment because it was, like, indicative, evocative of things that I've watched in my life that I'm into. And the other thing I was going to say is I think perhaps why he doesn't like it is because when I started watching it at 19 years old, it was, like, aspirational. Like, I had never written anything, at least in the comedy space, in terms of, a television or feature. So at the time when this came out, you guys both had, like, galvanized careers to a certain
You're
degree.
saying we're older than LeBron James.
I just barely, but I am saying that you were professionals. You were professionals before, and I think that changes also the way you look at something. But also, like, I'm watching it now through, like, the lens of nostalgia and just reminding me of a time period, of Flatten's time in that regard. But I do think that changes is something in terms of if you're already looking at it from a more kind of academic perspective, it does change, and you are kind of.
I mean, I was always a snob before I was even a professional. So,
and I'm still not a professional. So,
this argument is out the window then.
No, but I think it's a valid take, and I do think that there's an essential thing that is like, oh, these are the references. I like this world. I think that my counter argument against that is with West Wing, for example, it is also like, okay, it's based on this world. And maybe there are references to, this is an amalgam for this. This is like, a parallel to that going on in the world or has gone on in the world in the last several years. But I think the primary thing is the rhythm, the characters all feel kind of more grounded than they feel here to me. These characters feel so theatrical and sort of self-satisfied that it's like it doesn't even allow me to get into it. And the other thing I was going to say is, like, in West Wing, you might not be a fan of, like, politics or, maybe some people who were West Wing fans were that. There's no way all of them were or wouldn't have been that successful. The thing that feels more legit is that it's like, even when you do the character stuff and the things that they're debating, or lingo, or how the system works, it's kind of feels more grounded and like you're really digging into it. Whereas, and maybe this becomes more of this as the series goes on, in the pilot, it doesn't feel like this is legitimately the kind of conversation Oberman would have. It feels like it's like he's ginned up this conversation for the purposes of drama that doesn't even feel like it would necessarily happen at ESPN. It feels like the ESPN guys would be much more closed off with their emotions and more rat-a-tat and more like, all right, we're just having a conversation about sports and whatever, and find a way to organically have the conversations grow out of that, which maybe they do as the show goes on and finds its rhythm.
I think the show becomes more of a hard dramedy as things go along. And also, like, he just abandons, like, the kind of the multicam Benny Hill aspects of it. By episode 5 or 6, like, that scene, even though, like, Josh Molina's having a good time and he's acting his face off, it just does not fit, and it just feels like a Neil Simon play in a way that is not successful.
It was like let me throw a little Moliere into the middle of this sitcom pilot.
Yeah, totally so inconsistent. But I feel like that was just like, hey, here is a treat. So the next scene I get to have my two leads sit at a desk and just argue about a divorce and what in sports, and then say, like, the granddaddy of all sports stories, a double homicide in Brentwood. Like, fucking what?
Yeah.
So, like, I think he gives you that. He gives the network that. JJ, this network stooge, that, so then he can just have these self-serious conversation over here.
Well, and let me just tell you the two things. One, I agree with what you're saying, Andy, about all of them being so theatrical. And I was just thinking about it, and I was like, and this could be totally wrong, but I'm like, they needed a Josh. They needed a Bradley Whitford who just ends every scene by going, yeah, and underplays everything, you know?
Right.
But also the irony about that farcical scene is that, in a way, that was my favorite scene in the pilot because they talked about all my favorite Knicks, and it sent me down a Charlie Ward rabbit hole, and I started watching, his big fight with P.J. Brown, where everybody got suspended in the 1997 Eastern Conference Finals. So that part of it, I very much enjoyed.
This is what's so fascinating. It's a very interesting counterpoint because I'm exactly where Sean is. He mentions John Starks, my favorite Knick of really maybe my favorite basketball player of all time, and I'm still just like, this is the most cloying monologue. I just like...
Charlie Ward won the Heisman Trophy. He was almost going to play quarterback in the NFL. He fourth all time in terms of votes for Heisman Trophy. Second place was a guy who murdered a couple of people in Brentwood. So that sort of...
He's quoting the show.
All right, so let's get into it. We have the opening scene, which is about how important this program is and how there's so many people involved and everybody's hustling and bustling and finger snapping and we're about to go on air and everybody needs to get this right and that right and there's mistakes happening and everything's just moving and moving and moving and moving until we get on the air and it's a 5-second thing of like, we'll see you guys in a minute. And that's it. That's the whole thing.
Can I ask you, I don't know if you're even past the cold open or you were talking about the cold open, but the cold open, they're sort of on air. And then they go to the crew guy who's reading, the national bird of Finland is the whooping swan. And they both give a big look to the guy and they go, thank you. And you got to credits, or you got to the title. What was even the thought of what that was supposed to be?
That was after a whole sequence of the show getting ready to go on the air.
And the whole thing about Helsinki.
And was Helsinki in Sweden or Finland or Russia or France?
So it's just a callback to what they previously discussed. It's no joke, though. I'm not missing a joke.
I think the joke is that they are both so on the same page as far as everybody else being kind of idiots, which is not a hard joke. As we were discussing before, that this show is all about soft jokes.
I agree that it is also, there's not really any jokes. The best joke is really just about him saying that Helsinki is in Finland, I'm pretty sure, and just coming back to they play that song a bunch. But I will say, it starts in a 30-second like oneer, and you get everybody's kind of dynamics in there. You understand who Benson is, that he wields a lot of power as soon as he comes in. You understand like everybody's characters' names, and there's like 14 people in the cold open. I still think
make a good point.
It's pretty succinct and tight writing, even if there are zero jokes.
And we know that Dan is very smart. We know that Casey is mean. We know that Dan wears shorts underneath his jacket and tie, and Casey is going through a divorce. So they get a lot of exposition in there in a way that doesn't feel
like real ham-fisted,
completely expositional. Yeah.
I mean, that's certainly true. And for all of the hammering that I've done, and I will hammer more, there's no understating how unusual this show, what he was going for was, that they were shooting it in this cinematic style, that it was this different style, that he was like, I want to do my thing, and I'm going to put it in a sitcom. And for my money, it didn't work, but it clearly were a lot of fans. So, but it's what's undeniable is it was 100% unique, and he fully went for it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like the cold open is kind of a good example of what I'm talking about, where it feels like somebody is trying to make this thing really high stakes instead of it actually being really high stakes. Like it's presented super dramatically. And then, and I guess I'm contradicting myself, they let all the air out of it by having it just be a 5-second hit on the air, and then they're back into the studio again. So it actually isn't that big of a deal. They're just doing this quick thing. Okay, then we are in the office, and we see that Dan is pals with everybody. He's giving out high fives. He's talking to people at their desks about the sports stories from the night before. Apparently, Jason Grisham put somebody in the hospital at a strip club. And this is where I first picked up on the laugh track, and I was absolutely flummoxed by that.
Yeah, and it was crazy. And also the joke that they first use it on is also like, because this is a character who's there for the whole series, never really gets any meat on his bones, but the guy's like, he was arrested at a all-nude strip club, and the guy just goes like sad, like kind of upset about like, only topless.
Yes. And the audience is 100% on board at that point. Yeah.
It is interesting. One thing that also was a comment I saw from Sorkin is he was against it being live, and I think he was against the laugh track in theory, but he did sort of have a quote that was basically like, well, once you got the live audience, then you kind of have to have the laugh track, which I respect as like, you know, someone who has done multicam sitcoms is like, well, you have to cover edits, sometimes, you're reshooting stuff, so it got a big laugh the first time, but then they didn't do it right. And so it's like, that's true. But it is interesting that he was allowing for the laugh track anyway, which I thought was odd.
Well, I think he just lost that battle. I think he never wanted it. I also think this is, in reading about it, I couldn't find this, but I'm sure it's not a thing that you really went out there. But I think the story is, whether true or not, like he was just hauled up in whatever, the Peninsula Hotel out here while he's writing The American President, just doing
mountains of cocaine,
kilos of blow, and just fucking typing out, because I think the first draft of the American President was on like 300 pages, and he just had Sports Center on a loop. So after that, he's like, I got a great idea for a show.
As long as he was on cocaine, everything is forgivable,
it makes more sense, at least.
Right. So this is also the scene where we find out that Casey is going through a divorce, and it's not going well. He slept in his office. He doesn't live at his house anymore. So again, we're getting lots of information on these guys.
And there is like almost, you miss it, like a bet that has happened. Like she gives him money and they don't even draw attention to it. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess they had a bet.
Right.
So even like the things that are supposed to be jokes.
I don't even remember that, and I watched it yesterday.
Yeah.
So.
There's also I'm having a New York Renaissance running quote joke.
Yeah. Joke.
That keeps
joke
coming
or
leitmotif.
Whatever the
an attitude.
Really more accurate. Yeah. It's just like, can you go into the can you do the B room? We need some attitude alt.
It's like somebody looked at a tourist map of highlights of New York City and just checked them off as they were going through the episode by having them mentioned a number of times.
We need some different quirks for this character to mention in this episode.
We see Felicity Huffman and Robert
Guillaume
Chalamet in the hallway talking about their relationship. Does she have a relationship with Casey, which I think ultimately turns out to be a thing? I don't know where it goes later in the series, but it's certainly implied by the end of the episode, and I think was sort of prominent over the course of the series.
Yeah, they were the Ross and Rachel of the...
Who will they or won't they? Yeah.
Jeremy and Natalie ended up getting together, and then they broke up, and then he started dating a porn star in season 2, which was fascinating.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But no, the Casey and Dana were definitely the Sam and Diane.
Right. And so we hear about that there's a new hire, and does he know the difference between Sweden and Finland, the New York Renaissance stuff. And we're in this meeting, and this is one of the times where I was like, what the fuck is going on? And I get it, but it was the can't kick thing. Like, it just felt so setup, punchline, setup, punchline, setup. Third rule of threes, he can't kick. And then they went back to it again, and it was just a lot. It was a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that moment in particular, I agree with you. That and the next moment are the two moments that were the clearest moment of like, but you don't think we're a comedy? What about this? In fairness, in fairness to Sorkin, I wonder if he was under pressure to make it more of a comedy, and those are allowances, those moments,
Right.
Sure.
or if it's just like he was just like, here's my fucking ringer moments.
Although I feel like he does that kind of thing so much better in West Wing, like the sort of repetition and coming back to the same idea over and over again in a funny way. So, yeah, I don't know.
So maybe he just got better at it? You're saying?
That's what it feels like.
The whole show kind of feels like his junior college experience. And then he, got drafted.
Even to the point of the scene we were talking about before, which we'll get to, of the farce stuff, it felt like an experiment in a way, Okay, so we get into it with the network dude. They want to run the story about Antezaki Nelson. The network feels that's very boring and the ratings are not good, so they need to do something more interesting. It's just a big argument between Casey and Dan and the network at that point.
And the line, I'm not going to do the show with your high school driving instructor, JJ, if that's what you're asking. That's another moment that's like, it's almost like the audience is confused. It's just like, what's happening?
Right.
Is this but leaning into it like it's a punchline? And frankly, if they put a laugh track in it, they should have put a more definitive laugh track in it. So it's like, at least know that the show thinks this is supposed to be funny.
Well, I felt like when he said the driving instructor thing, I was like, is he saying that as a joke, or is he saying that because he doesn't understand what's being said right now? It felt like it was, I mean, I know it's supposed to be a joke, but it didn't feel like it was the character fucking with the other guy,
Well, that's another level. That's maybe maybe that is what was going on.
I think Sweet Baby Josh Charles knew exactly what he was doing.
He was keeping it ambiguous. So the network is upset. They want the ratings to be better. Maybe they're going to fire Casey. We don't know. And then we're out of Act 1.
I just want to go back to, I think like there is a moment where not everybody is adept at the real softballs of comedy here. I think like Josh Charles and Peter Krause are great like charm monsters, and that's part of the reason why I get into it. But I love that one moment where Benson was just like, don't fucking take me on. You're like, oh man, this guy's just a great actor. Just with with 3 words. And I'm like, he really brought more gravitas to this than has been present in this 10 minutes thus far.
He's also more of a trained multicam actor than probably anyone else in the pilot.
And I think that's a great point, like the charm monster thing and him being a great actor. It's like the cast in this show is just incredible.
Yeah, they're all ringers, but they're not ringers in this form.
No, exactly.
Except for Robert Guillaume.
But they're still who they are, and I think that helps to make you go, oh, I like this, because they're all so good and so likable. I mean, we know that the Felicity Huffman thing with the colleges happened years later, so maybe she's not that likable.
Yeah, that's what colors my
You don't like it when people cheat their way into good colleges.
When they just donate a wing, I'm fine with that. Big difference.
But we come back and we meet Jeremy Goodwin, who is a goofy, bespectacled, nerdy type of fellow.
He's in moving forward at being relatively, I mean, it's been 20 years since I've really watched it, or 18 years or something, but they like make him like a Woody Allen archetype in this intro and the pilot, and after that he just becomes like bookish, very astute, very kind of subdued. He doesn't have these like flights of neuroticism that, lead into the Neil Simon vibe.
Right. I'm remembering now that the thing that he does in this opening scene is the whole thing about the satellite or whatever. Like, he knows way too much about weather patterns and, what a nerd.
He's got glasses.
That gives it away, yeah. That's why I don't wear my glasses on when we're taping this show, because I don't want people to think I'm a nerd.
It is a podcast, Sean.
What's that?
It is a podcast, so you could wear your glasses if you want.
Hold on a second. I can't see who's talking. Then we come back and we're having a conversation between Casey and what's her name? Dana? Is that Felicity Huffman's character? About how he's in trouble and she doesn't want him to fuck her over because she loves her job so much.
This is another thing it feels like a Sorkinism also, but the thing of, I don't want you to screw me on this because I love this job so much.
Right.
Just really...
No subtext, just text.
Yep.
I don't know. It's just seemed... I don't know. Maybe this came out of network notes, but just like, it's so cloyingly like, these people, things are important to these people, and they love it.
Yeah.
They love their job so much. And it's just so much tell, not show, and...
How do we know she loves her job so much? Well, she says, I love my job so much, so that's kind of a dead giveaway,
Pretty clear.
This really made me uncomfortable watching it.
But we get that she's very invested and she wants Casey to do better and that they have side conversations. So, there's something there. There's ingredients there for more later. And then we come back to the sort of comedy high point of the entire episode, which is the Jeremy being interviewed by Dana scene with Natalie on board. And there's obviously something, Natalie is so in Jeremy's corner, so there's obviously something going on, or will be something going on between them.
Actually, that Sabrina Lloyd was one of the more skilled comedic actors in the show, outside of Robert Guillaume, who's not really given anything comedic to do. Just in that her persona sort of rhythmically was sort of funny, and the way she would deliver stuff or react to stuff was kind of funny. Whereas everybody else was in a very clear theater actor version of comedy.
Mm-hmm. The guy who said topless only, like that wasn't theater, man. He lived that. That was real.
Well, I think that guy just ad-libbed that.
That was improvised. That was not in the script. That was just the character reacting in the moment. And
also the other actress, who I don't think is that great, like her disgust at him saying that is like, yes, this could have been improvised.
This is also an interesting moment, and we don't have to get too into this, but it kind of startled me a little bit that, and I know it used to happen all the time, but Felicity Huffman does the thing where she pretends she's deaf for a second to emphasize that Jeremy's not listening to her, and she does it in sign language. Like, it just, at the time, I'm sure it just slid right by everybody, but now it's so jarring. Things are so different.
It was very jarring, and it felt like it was, getting set up for her iconic role in Transamerica, which was also another great choice. But it was like, I forgot about that. I was like, oh boy, this. I could see her. This felt like, I think Will H. Macy pitched this one at home when they were going on, like, hey, do the thing. Do the thing. You do it sometimes when I'm not listening. Do it.
It did totally feel to me like that was a thing that she came up with.
Yep.
Here's a bit I can do that's great. Let me just do this one little bit, and they let her do it, and it was like, whoa.
Mm-hmm.
On I think we passed this part where it's...
No, we got to keep going.
Where Robert Guillaume says the sort of line, it's your call, Dana, because pretty soon it's going to be my call, because I'm not going to let it be their call. Which I kind of like that. It's a good, good writing.
Yeah.
It's just bad tone. But that was a moment where it's just like, oh, I like that. I like that he's like laying it out. He's being honest with her. However, he leaves, and well delivered, and then he leaves, and the scene ends on Dana just going, yeah. And then that's the cut, and I'm like, what? Did you kind of realize this was a comedy after? And you're like, well, maybe just throw this in?
Exasperation. Don't do the deaf thing. We're saving that for the second act. Do something different.
Well, she was doing her Bradley Whitford. She was just doing the underplayed Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Then that's a Sorkinism, and maybe it was just more effectively done later.
And you're same with the dialogue. Like that line is a really good line. There, their choice, our choice, whose choice is our choice, or whatever you said.
It's your call because pretty soon it's going to be my call because I'm not going to let it be their call.
Right, and that is where you go. Okay, this dialogue is really good,
sizzling.
Right.
Okay, so then we come back, and this is the scene you were talking about, Steve, where Danny and Casey have a long exchange about whether Casey is going to quit the show.
I forgot, just before we get to that, there was one other thing in the scene with Peter Krause. There's this dialogue, which is she's saying, "You're screwing up my show," and he was saying, "Hey, can you cut this 30 seconds?" And so he goes, "Keep the 30 seconds." And she goes, "That's not what I mean." He goes, "I know, I was joking." And then she goes, "I know you were joking." And then he says, "Yeah, I could tell by the way you didn't laugh at all when I said it." And then she says, "That's because I'm mad at you, and also that wasn't funny." And I really felt like they were just describing the show at that point. And it was like, I'm not sure, like, is this supposed to be funny? It's supposed to be like, he's like, oh boy, he's being sarcastic. I'm kind of on board with that funny sarcasm. It's like,
yeah, just put it all in dialogue so then for subtitles they don't have to describe the subtext. She's very concerned about the deaf audience, is what it turns out.
Yeah. They almost put more American Sign Language in there, which is actually, she was doing real sign language. No, she was not. But so then we have Danny and Casey arguing about whether Casey should quit the show. Danny thinks he shouldn't. Casey thinks he should. And they go back and forth and back and forth. And we don't know. As the audience, we don't know. Is this the last time we'll see Peter Krause on the show?
Wow. Walking away on top after the pilot.
no, I think it's supposed to be, this is another thing that kind of irked me. It's supposed to be that he's like, after he does that on-air performance, he's back. They're never going to get rid of him now. I feel like that's the...
I'm with you 100%. I guess what
I
I'm
haven't
saying
seen the show,
is,
so maybe I'm wrong. But.
What I'm saying is, it's just a weird thing to hang the episode on because it's like, what's the jeopardy here? That he's going to leave the show?
The show that we are not even familiar with yet?
Yeah.
Well, they double down on it and they make it like that the network is so unhappy because he seems, I guess, checked out. Is that the sort of vibe? It's not really clear what he's doing on air that's such a problem.
Well, he's got a shitty wife that he's trying to divorce. That's what we find out in this scene is his wife sucks.
Yeah, the co-host is really hammering this wife that we've never met.
10 years, she has never given you an ounce of kindness, and I have no patience for that.
Yes.
That also felt like Sorkin was just airing maybe some dirty laundry.
Yeah, I've been divorced.
I've been waiting a long time to just take my shots at all the people that I hate, and this half-hour, 22-minute comedy is going to be the place.
Yeah, and I guess this is a thing that always bothers me when it happens in pilots of like, as a TV viewer, these are the people we're going to follow for the rest of the show, however long it lasts. But there's a great chance in the pilot that one of them will not come back. And it feels to me like it's hard to make that work and feel like there's stakes there.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, it's also like, again, as I said earlier, just like the whiplash of reversal.
Yeah.
And it's not earned, but for me, because it is such a hack to emotion, I'm like, yeah, I'm on board.
Well, and you did get to see everybody excited about the runner, and that's really what changed his mind.
I assume from this point forward, based on the vibe, that this becomes fairly serialized.
Yeah, there are some like one-offs. It's also
just to let our listeners know, Steve was nodding vigorously for about 15 seconds before he started speaking.
Yeah, well, I'm just having a nice conversation with some buddies here. But yes, there was like they took some swings that are like kind of in the way that, I don't know, you remember like Lost did the one episode about like the people who ended up getting buried, and they were just like, we need to make it more episodic. They did like one where it was again like interesting for the format at the time, where the Jeremy character, the whole device is he's writing a letter to his. Actually, I think maybe his. I'm not remembering, but it might be his deaf sister. But he's writing a letter to his sister who's still in college, and that's like the way they keep on jumping back around in time. And that was like that didn't really. I guess it played into what was being serialized, but it was more of a one-off. So they did some episodic stuff, but it was relatively pretty heavily serialized, which is also something we weren't seeing on network television for a comedy.
It's for a half hour, yeah.
I feel bad, and I think it just, as the Jerry Seinfeld line goes, it offends me as a comedian. I think it's just that's why it sort of sticks in my craw and I can't get past it. It's incredibly innovative. Like he was going against the grain. The network was fighting him, which is part of the reason it doesn't work for me, because they were trying to add decisions to it. And as has been evidenced, of course, today in the modern world, or in even the 10, 15 years after that, of course you can do a half hour that seems like a drama, and you can take out the laugh track and you can shoot it in a cinematic way.
And then you win every Emmy.
Yeah, you can win every comedy.
It doesn't even have to be funny, yeah.
But I mean, this is kind of the thing. But I guess my overall question is, why? I guess he just thought, I'm Aaron Sorkin, I can handle anything. Because my question is, why do a comedy in the first place? Why make this a
I think that's what we should all be asking ourselves.
About our lives, or
our stuff is not important.
Yeah. It's all horse shit, guys.
But it is interesting, because I think you're right, and I think this is what Steve was saying before, is like, for the time when it was in context of what was going on at the time, it was an incredibly innovative show. So of course there's going to be stuff that they're still figuring out. And I think what's interesting about it also to me is like, he did this and then he just fucking hit it out of the park with West Wing, And some of the stuff he learned from this obviously goes into West Wing and works way better.
Yeah, and again, I think it's also just like a man who is just doing a cocaine hippo's worth a blow while writing The American President. Like, you've got some confidence. So I think he's probably very funny in conversation. He's probably very charming, and he understands how to write very charming dialogue, but hard jokes is not his thing. So I think it was like, again, hubris. The same reason that he went back to fucking Studio 60. It's like, well, I didn't know what I was doing back then. But the problem was not only the format and the fact that he was less than the 10,000 hours, but it was also like, it's too self-serious. There's too much heightened importance for you to be doing anything around the comedy realm.
Right.
Steve, by the way, how is your cocaine hippo cartoon coming?
It's great, but I just keep on going through the inspiration too fast.
This is some good cocaine.
Cocaine hippo, you did all the cocaine again.
I can't stop myself.
That's you really high?
Yeah, I'm so out of my mind. My heart is racing.
You're just rolling around slowly in mud, cocaine hippo.
I love it. I love it.
Steve, did you have another point that you were going to get to before that I cut you off from?
I don't think so. If I did, it was not. It left my brain when I opened my mouth.
Sean, did you have anything else on the pilot to cover? Because otherwise, it's going to maybe ask Steve about his own pilot experience.
Well, why don't we finish the last couple of scenes?
Do we have to?
Because we're now on the entire office watching Antezaki Nelson, and Casey gets so excited he calls his wife and tells her to put his son on the phone because finally there's something redemptive about sports. And again, this kind of thing really cracks me up, is they're watching this thing on TV and somebody goes, that time can't be right. Like, so we know that it's an incredible performance,
But this is my point, is the footage that they got for that guy was just a turkey trot. He was going so fucking slow. He was, I know it's 15,000 meters, which is, far, but like that guy was, he looked like when you're in the crosswalk and you try to make it look like you're going faster, you move your arms a little bit, but you're not going any faster. That's what he was doing. Like, just from, even though it's a background footage thing, very distracting by how slow that man who was clearly 60 was moving.
I know what would have helped him.
Cocaine hippo, stay away from the actors.
That's not the only answer, but you are right in this one instance.
That's also a weird thing, just having had sports footage on a show that I worked on, where it's like, unless you want to like spend a ton of money, it's hard to get something that actually
aligns.
Works.
Yeah.
So then he's on the phone with his son and has a very sweet one-sided conversation where his son says, "I love you, Dad," before he says, and he just goes, "I love you too, Charlie." So we know that this is a really great moment that he'll remember for the rest of his life, you know? And then he's back. He's back. Literally somebody says he's back. And this is kind of what you were saying before, Steve, where it's like, it's just very quick and it feels very...
Not earned, but it just because there's all these, you know, you see like a puppy, you know, like the hacks to like just evoke emotion when it's not earned, it did it. But and also there's a weird thing. It's not quite exactly the same as Felicity Huffman, you know, doing name three things while doing slight deaf voice. But when he said, instead of that, going on the Staten Island ferry, what if we just go to a bar and beat up some dorks, is basically what he said.
Yeah.
And I was like,
why don't we find people we don't like and beat the crap out of them?
yeah, there you go. Yeah.
What was that? It didn't feel like, let's go get drunk. It felt like, no, this is something we do.
I got some Mickeys. We can throw them in some drinks while we're at it.
It didn't even feel like just fight. It felt like, let's go provoke a fight with people that we decide we have beef with. It's not presenting them as likable in the classic sitcom form.
As one of the people who has frequently been the victim of that type of thing, there are those type of guys in the world. That's just not the type of guy who ends up hosting sports night, you know?
Yeah, or just like from a network note, like they don't seem likable enough. No, that is universal. That is likable. We all been there after a long day.
Come on. Who doesn't like to go into a bar, provoke a fight with a person, with an innocent bystander that you decide you don't like?
Yeah.
I was literally in a bar once and I sat down at the table, just got there, sat down at the table. And these guys at the next table, I heard one of them say, "How about we beat the shit out of these guys?" And I ended up in the hospital.
What?
Yeah. Different story for another time.
That's the pilot. Come on, Aaron Sorkin. Those stakes are high.
Sean, you needed to start the fight first.
Yeah, I should have swung first, right.
Yes.
How about we beat the shit out of these guys? How about you don't?
How about too late?
Okay, so then we just have this little moment between Dana and Casey, and that sort of indicates where they're going. And then Casey and Dan argue about rugby for a little bit, and we're out of the episode. The end.
Executive producer Aaron Sorkin.
Laugh track by Phil's Laugh Tracks.
Do you want less than a laugh track, but more than a Twitter? Phil's Laugh Track is there.
Phil's whispery laughs.
When you don't really want the laugh track, but you can't quite give it up.
I got all sorts. I've been recording laugh tracks off the television for decades, so I can use any of those. The recording quality is not great. It's
with a very rudimentary microphone.
Yeah, I use my old boombox.
I bring my recording equipment next door to a studio that's recording a sitcom. And I get all my muffled laughs there.
And I just kind of like to do it like, I throw my laughs in. Like, you ever played darts and you close your eyes and just let it fly? That's where I put my laughs. Just throw them wherever.
That was the thing that bugged me the most. It wasn't even the fact that it was so quiet the whole time. It was that it was so random.
And so inconsistent.
Yeah.
Well, it's because there's no joke patterns to fucking figure out where the end of jokes are.
Dude, I will say, very much liked, even though the character, at least in the pilot, does not exist in this world, when Josh Molina says, I'll stay out of your way, and immediately bites it because this chair was taken. Pretty good. Pretty good.
Classic farce.
Uh-huh. Yeah, he's in Noises Off. The rest of them are doing West Wing, but...
Right.
So, Steve, do you have any pilot experiences yourself? You're kind of what I would call you know what I would call you? Here's what I would call you.
Okay, please.
Professional podcast.
This is a lot of buildup.
You're not a Sorkin character at all, are you?
No, I'm definitely not. You're an expert at pitching pilots. You've sold many pilots. I kind of even look to you as someone who's very adept at that process. Do you have any pilot stories, incidents, occurrences that are of note?
I mean, I think
happenstances.
Oh, good. Thank you. That sets me down a different path. I think I've been okay at selling things. The thing I've not been great at is getting them made.
It's an extra hurdle.
It's an extra hurdle. It's a big one.
Sadly, every level, selling it is the highest level of difficulty. Getting it shot as a pilot is another insane high level of difficulty.
I can never get them written.
Sean has problem number one.
Yeah, that's a hard part. Well, I think there is something to be said for you guys far more so, but having a performative background, like that's at least what I did all throughout high school, college, and my first couple of years out here before I got waylaid by being sick for a long time. But I think just being able to, because there's such different skills, writing and pitching. One is selling cars, and the other one is doing this very cerebral, lonely thing. I feel like if you have any of that kind of performative background, it goes a long way. So I don't know what stories to kind of imbue to this, but I think there is something to be said, like for Sorkin in this. I think the things that didn't really work were just like him, Josh Charles saying like, "Hey, your ex-wife is a real hooer." Like that stuff, like that felt like those are the Sorkin things. Like I'm writing what I know. That doesn't work in this context. But I think in terms of selling something, like having that level of passion and like being able to talk to about like why it's your story to tell, and those are probably the things that he kind of leaned into in this, right? Like I've gone through a divorce. I lost my my passion for writing for a while until, I don't know, I saw Rent,
Right.
whatever the fuck his thing was, But I think like those are the ways that you get into the world, because he was never a broadcaster. He likes it, but you can imagine you can pitch that world. But like, how is this world that I really don't know anything about, how is it still mine?
That's, you know what? That's probably true.
Yeah.
It also is why it's like, oh, that's probably what he led with, was all these emotional stories. He's Peter Krause as a kid, and the kid is, he's separated from him, but he's going to tell him he loves him at the end. And it's just sort of like, yeah, okay, this is not a comedy.
Well, wait a second. Hold on. Also, we got this whole runner about how you guys are fucking idiots. We're going to do that the entire time for all 2 seasons. You're the only enemy, really.
And a kicker for the Bengals who can't kick. He can't kick. He can't kick. He cannot kick.
Yep.
But to your point also, Steve, Sorkin was an actor. He was a performer before he started all this writing bullshit, know?
And you can feel it, though, because you can tell, like, God, I remember reading, this was years ago, and I just remember it, I don't know, but just like, Tarantino talks about, like, I want to write one fucking great thing for every actor. It'll be like, to really sink their teeth into, like, they're really like, oh, that's what I'm, grasping onto, and I can build a character off of that. And I think he comes from a performative background too, but Sorkin, like, you can see, I mean, he just writes all these long lyrical monologues, but there's one, and I think it's the end of the season 1, I don't remember, but at one point, William H. Macy's there for a couple episodes. Like, he's like this, show whisperer who brings people, he gets shows, higher ratings and that kind of thing. And he tells this whole, like, this very long walk and talk throughout the whole studio about how, like, Philo Farnsworth.
This is so funny.
Yeah, Sorkin ended up writing a play about this, but, like, how he knew his brother-in-law was doing this amazing thing with science, and he was building the television. And Philo Farnsworth didn't know anything about that, but what he did know he could do is he could make glass tubes, and he knew he needed glass tubes. And he just tells this whole, like, really, like, fascinating story, and at the end is like, I make glass tubes. I can't do what they do, but I know I can help them. Get the fuck out of here. And that's like the whole thing. It's like this 2 minutes that's really just like a story that he finds interesting. But I'm there along with him, and he finds like a way to tie it at the end. Like, this is why I've told you this story. And that's probably for every actor is like, yeah, all right, I'm in. I want to tell that story.
It's also so funny, the things that have been, people have made a million Sorkin supercuts showing all the things repeated again and again. But it's so funny that this even goes back to Farnsworth Invention, which was a play, goes back to this, where he's telling the same story about Farnsworth.
Yep.
And then in Farnsworth Invention, there's like a thing, there's a speech.
Let me tell you about a show that's going to come along called Sports Night.
You know why we're building this contraption? I'll tell you. Well, they're going to reinvent the medium is what they're going to do. They're not going to quite get rid of the laugh track.
I build sports nights.
Have you ever watched something that's not quite funny, and also not quite sad? It's kind of neither in between. It's kind of like dying and going to purgatory. Well, that's a show that's going to be on this one day.
The thing I was going to say is in Farnsworth Invention, there's a thing where he gives a speech about we're always looking for what's next, which is a speech right out of West Wing. So yeah, you gotta give him credit. For him, it's just sort of like people come for the Sorkinisms. I'm giving him the Sorkinisms.
I can't even remember any of the supercuts except the one that I remember is used over and over again is I'm never ever sick at sea. Because that is a quote from HMS Pinafore that I was in college. So the first time I heard it, I was like, oh, cool, Aaron Sorkin's using that. And then in like 5 other things he's done since then, he has one of the characters say, and I'm never ever sick at sea.
Which, honestly, I get because, like, I have definitely many times, like, had a project that died, and it's like, you know what? I really like this one fucking story, this one piece, but I always put it in something that like is I take it from a body. I take an organ and give it life in another body. Like I don't take it like, well, this
worked really well that time.
Can I borrow your kidney?
But I'm alive still. Yeah, he does. There is one thing that I do think of frequently from the show, and it is, I think it's in the first season, and it's the Felicity Huffman character and her like niece is in town, and she's gonna take her to Lion King because that's the big show, and she is flummoxed that like it's hard to get tickets. She's like, fucking people care about theater, musicals, and anyways, at the end, it's a very dumb story, but at the end, she has this very simple thing. She's like, she went and she's marveled by it, and she's like, I didn't know we could do that. I didn't know that we as a species could do that. And it's like, and it's like a thing they kind of say from that point forward a little bit in the series. Just like, look what we can do. I didn't know we can do that. Look what we can do. I think it's just like the thing I gleaned that I like the most of this series. Just like that little element. It's like, I didn't know we could do that. And the Intozaki Nelson, like again, hits me in my core. Because look at that. Even if it's a fake guy, 41 years old, running faster than anybody else, like, fuck, look what we can do.
It really worked on you, and clearly it worked on most other people. I'm surprised that it didn't work on you, Sean. I thought that I was going to be the lone person, the lone dissenter today.
But I did love The Lion King. I thought it was great.
See, there you go.
That really worked on
Julie Taymor is a genius.
Oh, man. The
Lion
people
King
that look like giraffe.
Yes. The things that spin, all those, you know.
The elephant was in the aisle.
I didn't see any representation of myself there.
Sorry, Cocaine Hippo.
You were backstage.
I know, I was busy.
Where's Cocaine Hippo? He's on in 5. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, sure.
For your favorite show
that we got to trash.
Yeah, there was a period where it was up there. I watched it again. Does it hold up now? But, you know.
And this is kind of what we've been talking about, is seeing Sorkin at an early point where he gets so much better over time, you know? People might disagree with that, but that was my perception of it, is he was trying stuff out, he was experimenting, he was doing something different, and it didn't quite work, but then eventually it did. And that's kind of cool to see.
And even like the things, like it's weird because now that he's directing his own things, he's kind of gone like full circle, and like the Chicago 7 is kind of feels like the American President or A Few Good Men in a way. Like it's like he's become his own editor, where he's not doing all that fucking, I don't need to like have everything just be such a rat-a-tat pace. You don't need to say the same word. He can't kick 7 times in a row. Like he's become a better editor as the longer he's gone. Right.
I do want to see at some point a short film that's a spin-off just about Josh Molina's character, and he's just like tripping over things, falling down the stairs, you know, doing all the things that are so silly.
That and the one guy, I mean, if this was before they did tags mostly, but if just the one guy at the end just sits down at a fully nude strip club and he's so happy.
Just all pixelation everywhere around him.
This is right. This is the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah. That's it for co-pilots. Thank you both for joining me on my podcast.
I didn't realize it was your podcast. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Steve. And ladies and gentlemen, wheels are down, flaps are down. We are touching down in Dallas.
The door didn't blow off this time.
Take care, everybody. Where's Cocaine Hippo? He's on in 5.